Speed reigns supreme. Speed means action, thrill, adrenaline, and excitement. That's what you get with motorsports. Motorsports and the thrill of speed exists globally with sanctions like stock car racing, open wheel racing, sports car and endurance racing, rallycross, dirt racing, drag racing, among many more kinds of sanctions. It's something that can be enjoyed by anyone when you think about it. You don't have to be an expert on cars to necessarily enjoy it. You may find a driver or a team that you can attach yourself to and cheer for every race weekend. Sometimes it can be the sponsor that can drive you into it, whether that may be your favorite car company or a company that you are connected with in a way. If you watch any form of motorsport, I'm sure you may have used a certain product or service because of your favorite driver or team. I won't lie, as a kid growing up, I always wore Wrangler jeans because of the commercials Dale Earnhardt Jr. did, since Dale Earnhardt Jr. was my favorite driver. It's honestly really cool to see so many different companies and brands represent themselves on a very fast automobile. It's like watching a colorful rush of speed go by, and these are many of the reasons why speed reigns supreme. So, how and why did I become a fan of motorsports? Well, let's travel back to Christmas 2003. Back when Blockbuster ruled the world, everyone was jamming to Linkin Park, and we only had AIM and Yahoo Messenger while browsing the internet on a Windows XP computer. Got enough nostalgia yet? Anyway, I had just turned 7 years old, and my brother and I got a PlayStation 2 for Christmas. The first two games we got with it were ATV Off-Road Fury 2 and Gran Turismo 3. We used to play these games and do the goofiest of things, like unique ways to crash and burn in ATV Off-Road Fury 2 and have my brother drive the Dodge Viper sports car while I drove in the Mini Cooper in Gran Turismo 3. I loved Gran Turismo 3, or GT3, growing up. This was really the game that introduced me to motorsports and racing in general. I just loved the idea of watching cars go fast. After a while of playing it, I would rent different kinds of racing games from this place called Blockbuster, like I mentioned before. Okay, look, I know I'm 25, but I have to do it just to be funny. For the younger people here, this used to be a place where you would actually get up and go somewhere to rent a movie or a game for a week and bring it back. So one day during the summer of 2004, I rented a game called NASCAR Thunder 2003. It caught my attention for whatever reason. So I picked the game out and began playing it. I remember one of the biggest things that stuck out to me early on was the number 41 Target Dodge. I knew about Target, I've been in a Target, and thought since seeing that in the car was pretty cool at the time. This game, of course, covered the 2002 NASCAR season. Jimmy Spencer at the time drove this car. I began playing it and driving on the different tracks that the game had. In particular, I remember being really good at New Hampshire for some reason. I was really into the game, and my dad noticed how bummed I was that I had to return the game, since, I rented it from Blockbuster. So a week later, he brought home NASCAR Thunder 2004. That came out in 2003 for the PlayStation 2. And I was pretty happy. Yes, it was a different game, but I got to play this NASCAR game more. And not too long after, my dad asked me if I wanted to watch an actual NASCAR race on TV. So I did on that July afternoon in 2004. That race being the Tropicana Twister 400 at Chicagoland Speedway. I only knew a handful of drivers like Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. at the time, but I remember really getting into it. Just watching 43 cars roar by lap after lap, seeing all kinds of action on the track, and keep in mind that during that race weekend, an inflatable Tropicana Orange was blown onto the track thanks to gusty winds. During that cup race, Tony Stewart and Casey Kane's pit crews got into a huge fight too, and I swear 7-year-old me was like, whoa! Anyway, Tony Stewart did go on to win that race. Though for the first few weeks, I admit, I actually was a Jeff Gordon fan, funny enough. I remember watching him win the 2004 Brickyard 400 on TV as well. However, I began to really get into it more and more and more, so much to where I remember my classmates in like second grade were like, "Why do you like NASCAR so much? That's weird. Watch NFL." Which, don't get me wrong, I do watch football. So let me explain. When I was in 7th grade, so this was like 2009, 2010, and if you're a Dale Jr. fan like me, we try to forget those years, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Basically, it's a form of autism where you may have a hard time relating to others socially. Plus, behavior and thinking patterns can be quite rigid and repetitive. So why am I bringing this up? Well, one trait of Asperger's syndrome is that you tend to think or talk about a certain interest or certain range of activities or interests. So basically, it's like narrowing down certain things that you're interested in. So in this case, as a kid in elementary school, I was all on NASCAR. Motorsports became part of that narrow range of interests, and, well, I see it now more than ever at the age of 25. Going back to those early years, I would end up becoming a fan of Dale Earnhardt Jr. not too long after. And going back to Asperger's again, I ended up getting NASCAR DVDs and books to learn more about the drivers and the history of the sport as well. I got so interested and learned so much that one time at a race, I want to say it might have been 2006 at Atlanta. I'll have to ask my dad for that. I was like 9 years old at this point. I was 9 years old. There were two guys behind me trying to figure out how many championships that Terry Labonte had won. One guy said that he knew he had one, so they were like, "Oh, I think Terry got at least one title, right?" "Yeah, I think so." Something clicked in my head, and I just remembered, and I said to them, "Yeah, he won 2 championships, 1984 and 1996. Those two were quite impressed, and my dad loves telling that story all the time, and it makes me laugh too. So when I learned about, drivers back then, especially Dale Earnhardt and his story, I wanted to start pulling for his son, Dale Jr. Heck, I remember the movie 3, a Dale Earnhardt story that came out in 2004. It's funny how even to this day, I'll mention to someone how much I love NASCAR, and a lot of the responses I would get are, "Oh yeah, well, my uncle loved NASCAR. My grandfather was a huge Earnhardt fan," or something along the lines of that. And I really didn't realize until I was in college that younger fans like me were not as common as the older fans. But that's what I kind of hope to do with this video, is that I want to showcase that anyone can enjoy not just NASCAR. Obviously, yeah, NASCAR is number one for me, but I'm talking about all of motorsports. So whether it's IndyCar, IMSA, Formula One, supercars, dirt racing, whatever it may be, I don't want to be the only person to express my love for motorsports. As a matter of fact, I have others here too that feel the same way as I do. I actually asked quite a few people to talk about why they love racing and what makes it great.
So I'm not sure if I can really pinpoint, one exact thing that really got me into racing. If I had to say anything, it would probably be my parents. I don't really come from much of a racing family. It's just more so my dad was a fan of it, and my mom was also a fan of it. She got that from her dad and my grandfather, who I know was a pretty big Cale Yarborough fan, and I know that he also took her to Langley Speedway as a kid. So if I had anything to say, it would probably be I got into it from my parents. As far as actually competing in it, I would say my story is probably a lot different than others. We never had the money or the connections to really do it. And then I found this local Legends Car series, and I got in contact with the owner of it, and they invited us out to Kentucky Speedway just to kind of talk to some of the teams and kind of learn more about the series. And we had plans of starting in that series in the Legends Cars. Unfortunately, that series ended up shutting down shortly before we really got into it, so we ended up going with karting after that. And obviously we were probably fish out of water in that. We showed up with a flatbed trailer on the back of our caravan, and we got some pretty funny looks from some of the other competitors. But yeah, we kind of kept at that for a few years. It's not something that my parents, I don't think, really wanted to do, but at the same time, they wanted me to be able to pursue what I love. And then I eventually was able to get in contact with a midget owner, and that's kind of what started me out in car racing. And around this time, I also started working in the ARCA Menard series, I started out working with Prater before going on to Peterson, then worked for Eric Caudell for probably the longest time out of any of the teams I've worked with. I think I worked with him for 3 seasons, and I've been working on being able to get a drive-in ARCA lately, which, obviously we're still working on that. We had plans for this year, which unfortunately nothing really was able to come of it. A lot of stuff just kind of got in our way. So right now we're just trying to get the head start on next season, and hopefully we'll be on track a few times. As far as what we love about racing, there's just so many things you could mention. I mean, I would probably say the top reason is the camaraderie that everybody experiences. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about some miscreants getting through, but for the most part, I know that it's a pretty tight environment, and generally everyone there looks at each other as family. And there's just also something very electric about the whole atmosphere. I mean, you got fast cars, bright colors, the smells, the sounds, everything. It just keeps people coming back. So honestly, it is a very tough sport, but if you don't love it, then I don't know why you would be trying to do it. So that's probably the best explanation I can give of why I love the sport and how I got into it.
Hey, this is NASCAR Xfinity Series driver Ryan Vargas. I love racing a lot. I actually grew up being a major race fan, and still to this day I'm a pretty big race fan. I watch it every Sunday, watch all sorts of racing, whether it's sports cars, off-road, NASCAR, whatever it is, 4 wheels and a motor, I love it. And the biggest thing, the reason why I love it is because it's really pure. I love the pureness of racing because of the fact that it really just brings into the fact of you're trying to find some unadulterated speed, but also there's the risk factor of anything can go wrong at any time. You could be leading the race by 30 seconds and suddenly have a tire blowout, and now the race is blown wide open. And that's something that I like about racing. It's so unpredictable. There's so many factors that go into it. So that's why I love racing.
The biggest reason I love racing is because I get to spend countless hours throughout the year, and even if it means rebuilding an entire race car from front to scratch, basically within a week's time. So I get hands-on experience working on race cars, getting to drive race cars, which there's nothing like that in the road. Going to a corner sideways at 100 miles an hour, even faster sometimes. There's balls to the wall. I mean, there's no bigger adrenaline rush or excitement in this entire world that compares to it. And I get to make countless memories. Like I said, building a race car almost from scratch in a week's time with some of the greatest guys I know. I mean, it's a perfect recipe for perfect memories, and it's a lot of fun, and it might be a pain in the butt sometimes, but at the end of the day, it's all worth it. So racing for me is kind of a personal matter. It's more or less a family matter. My dad's owned cars since the 90s, even the 80s. I think he started working on them. So when he started racing in the early 2000s himself, he didn't really have a pit crew. So like little 2, 3, 4-year-old me would always go to the track with him. You'd have to find somebody to babysit me while I was on track. So I was introduced to racing at a very young age. And being around that atmosphere just kind of got my blood, infused in that whole genre of motorsports and short track scene. I'm like, when I get old enough to do this, I want to do this. And I started racing go-karts when I was 8 years old. So I was fortunate to be able to start young. And I think honestly, if it wasn't without my dad and the awesome guys that we surrounded ourselves with, I definitely wouldn't have begun racing and definitely would not have made it this far.
The best way to summarize my love for racing is that I love it because of its excitement and the community that builds it. It's human nature to be attracted to excitement, and the fact is that you're always going to find something to be excited about. At least one racing series out there will have what you're looking for. NASCAR features high momentum, physical racing that ensures there's always something greater at stake. Formula One features the most engineered race cars in the world racing across exotic and classical circuits alike. Dirt racing features the grittiest drivers and teams hanging on for dear life in front of a loyal small-town crowd. And Formula E showcases a forward-thinking philosophy with electric cars racing right in the center of a city. If you want something out of a racing series, it's probably out there. Racing is something that everyone can and should experience, and that's why I want to be a part of growing racing's future however I can behind the scenes.
So I really got into racing when I was about 11 years old. I I always kind of wanted to race growing up, and I always watched NASCAR. My parents, I kind of always pick my parents to be able to take me to a racetrack and get them a race car, and we couldn't afford it. So when I was about 11 years old, we went to a place called Chicago Indoor Karting, and we were able to get me in a go-kart for one time, and I went in for one race, and I really liked it. It was the adrenaline rush, the speed, everything going by as quick as possible, and you had to react really quick, and just the thrill of it and the sheer excitement of driving the car was something that just made me fall in love with racing. And I've been here on this roller coaster journey ever since, and I'm glad for it, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Soccer, or football in other countries, is considered to be the biggest sport in the world. Baseball is always considered an American pastime. The NFL is also widely popular and is looking to expand into international markets. And yes, once upon a time, NASCAR was very popular in the mainstream spotlight when I first started watching. It is true that over time, popularity has declined. However, NASCAR still has a great following and is working harder than ever before to attract new fans, and the same can be said for other forms of motorsports too. They've been getting more innovative to attract new fans. Especially for NASCAR, they've been going to new markets. They held a race inside the Los Angeles Coliseum, and in 2023, they will take to the streets of Chicago in its first Street Circuit Cup race. In other forms, IMSA still has a great following with events like Road Atlanta, Daytona, and Sebring. IndyCar still has the Indianapolis 500 that draws about 300,000 people to the Memorial Day event. The fact is, motorsports is enjoyed by anyone. You don't even have to be a complete expert on cars. It's not an exclusive club. It's a passion, it's a thrill, and it's a fun time. And I can guarantee you this, that if you go to a race, you're going to want to come back. Why do I mention all this? Because speed means action, thrill, adrenaline, and excitement. That's what you get with motorsports. It's a truly beautiful thing, and there's nothing quite like it. Because after all, speed reigns supreme.